I can vividly remember the first time that I listened to In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 by Coheed and Cambria, because it was not at all what I was expecting, and it kind of blew my mind into tiny pieces, but we gotta get into this slow. So I, like probably most people who discovered Coheed, found out about them from the song A Favor House Atlantic, which was a pretty major single. I remember seeing the music video on TV, hearing the song on the radio. It was a really fun track. Back then, I was probably 13 when that song came out, and it was, I was someone who listened to a lot of radio at the time, but didn't like very many songs. It was rare that something came out that really sparked my attention, and that year would have been the same year that, like, Modest Mouse Float On came out, as well as this track, and they were, like, my two favorite songs on the radio that year. But this is before the internet was to the point where I could easily just look up who made these songs, like, what the hell are they? So, it's just a song I kind of knew from floating around on the radio. And then a little while later, the song Blood Red Summer from the same album also got a music video, which I remember seeing a few times on the Fuse network or whatever, which would have been probably even before The Widow came out, and I discovered the Mars Volta album that I started this old-ass album cast on. But while I liked both of these songs, I did not go out and seek this band or the album. I vaguely knew that they were by the same band, Coheed and Cambria, but I didn't know anything else about them. So then their third album came out, which is Good Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, Part 1, From Fear to the Eyes of Madness. And the huge single off of that album was Welcome Home, which, in spite of the fact that it's often seen as, like, the big Coheed single and the one that, like, put them on the map, funnily enough, it wasn't really a big single on TV at the time or on the radio. It really took off from being in Rock Band, I think. Like, this was not a song that the average person knew until it kind of took off from that game, and then suddenly it caught a second wind, I think. I could be wrong about that, but that's how it looked to me. Because this is a song that I really was seeking out, but could barely find. I remember seeing it, like, early morning on Fuse a couple times, and then, like, never again. And that song had shocked me, because I was familiar with their other stuff, which was more like bubblegum pop fun shit, and with, like, high-pitched vocals and all that, and then they suddenly come out with this, like, heavy fucking rock song, like, borderline metal. And me being a heavy rock metal fan at the time, I was really excited about this. So I super wanted this album. But it was a while. It was a long while before I'd get around to it. As I talked about on the first album's cast, and sort of on the second one, I got into music at a point when my family moved into the ghetto, and we didn't have money for me to buy anything, because previously I'd been into, like, video games and anime. I didn't have the money to purchase those anymore, and this was before, illegal streaming and downloading was as rampant as it would later become, and I had a shit internet connection, so there's no way in fuck I could have torrented anything, even if I knew how at the time. We're talking 2004, actually maybe late 2005. Yeah, probably late 2005 is what we're talking about. Early 2006. Anyways. So I'd gotten into the Mars Volta right before we moved to the ghetto. And so a lot of the time while we lived there, I was pretty much listening to Francis the Mute, Demon Days, Meteora by Linkin Park, American Idiot by Green Day. I haven't decided if I'm going to do podcasts on either of those two albums, because there's a lot of stuff I want to cover, but we'll see. But the point is that I got really into music in that time. And then it was really when we moved from there into a new house, and my dad returned to doing the car business, which is, what had been bringing home the bacon before we had to live in the ghetto and all that. And eventually my allowance got reinstated. And it was around this time when we'd moved back that I really started heavily listening to the stuff that was in my computer library. And this is where I started getting into bands like Tool in a big way, Gwar, which was on my computer. Wasn't, like, hugely into them, but, this is the stuff I had. So I just had all kinds of, like, random music and tracks on my computer that my cousin had illegally downloaded onto it, which had ruined the computer, by the way. Like, my computer could not connect to the internet because it had been choked to death by viruses from my cousin fucking downloading bullshit on LimeWire. But at least I had a ton of CDs that he had either illegally downloaded or just like ripped onto my computer for some reason. So once I was eventually able to make an allowance again and I was getting into music, I thought I would start buying CDs. Because, once again, it wasn't easy to illegally download music without filling your computer with viruses, and people wonder why I was nervous about torrents for a long time. So all I really had to go on was bands that I had heard on the radio and thought were cool, and there were a few big radio singles that I'd been excited about and wanted to check out the albums. One, of course, being Welcome Home by Coheed and Cambria, the other being Take Me Out by Franz Ferdinand. So I bought both of these CDs at once. I bought the Franz Ferdinand self-titled album, which I do like, and I've continued to listen to, but they never became a favorite. That was always an album that I thought was okay. It was easy to listen to with my family, because, like, my mom and my brothers all had fun with it, but I was never, like, massively into that album. However, Coheed and Cambria, so I couldn't find Good Apollo. In fact, it took me a while to actually track that album down, but I did find In Keeping Secrets of Silent Air 3, and I was like, well, this one has a Favorite House Atlantic on it, so at least it has some songs I know. But I was disappointed that it didn't have, because I'm thinking, you know, clearly they've moved in a metal direction. Like, their two bubblegum pop songs are on In Keeping Secrets of Silent Air 3, and their metal songs on the new album, so, you know, like, I'm expecting this one to be more pop song oriented. And keep in mind, A Favorite House Atlantic is 4 minutes long. Blood Red Summer's 4 minutes long. Like, these are normal radio rock songs. They're a little weird, you know, but they're pretty straightforward. They're not, like, extremely complex or prog or anything like that. These are just very straightforward tracks that are a lot of fun. So I put in the album, and I remember that my brother Victor was playing Radiata Stories at the time. I told you that a lot of my favorite albums are tied to video games. So whereas Demon Days was tied to Baten Kaitos and watching my brother play that, and Keeping Secrets is related to Radiata Stories. I don't know why they both happen to be like really obscure JRPGs, but that's what my brother was playing at the time. So I put this thing in, and track 1 opens with the sound of a telephone ringing. And there's this telephone ringing until a woman picks it up and says, "Hello," and then suddenly it just explodes into this huge orchestral sound. And I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? Like, this has already completely taken me aback. Like, there's a giant orchestral symphonic noise coming through. Now, listening to this today, I'll tell you, it's pretty cheap sounding. Like, I couldn't tell the difference between, like, synthesized instruments and real ones back then. I don't think there's any, like, actual orchestration on this song. There would be on their next album, on Good Apollo, when they actually did get the budget to do something like that. But, In Keeping Secrets of Silent Air 3, what's honestly kind of impressive about this album is that while the production is kind of lackluster and very cheap and thin, they still pull off a lot of really big epic sounds, and like that's kind of no small feat. Like, every time I listen to the track In Keeping Secrets of Silent Air 3 today, which is track 2 on the album, my first thought is always, man, I wish these guitars didn't sound so thin and tinny. And then by the end of the song, I'm like, it doesn't matter, this song is still epic as shit. But anyways, so I get through the Ring and Return, and of course I get to that track, and I'm blown the fuck away. This song is, first of all, 8 minutes long, and it is immediately hitting you with these sweeping, epic guitar riffs that are, like, painting this picture of a battle. Like, this whole song is about and successfully emulates the feel of a battlefield. Like a huge epic space sci-fi war. Like the scene in The Matrix 3 when the mechs are fighting the fucking robot things. Like, that scene is here. And you get to the chorus where he's screaming, "Man, you're out, jackhammer!" And I'm like, what the fuck? This is awesome. Like, I'm like 14 all I care about is, like, heavy music and cool epic shit. And this is the most epic thing I've heard. So, like, I'm losing my mind listening to this song. It's immediately, like, the greatest thing I've ever heard. And so this album goes, and it's so long. Like, this thing is, I know it's over an hour. I don't know if it's 80 minutes or how long it is exactly. I'm looking at the track list, but I can't actually math the total length because it's not displayed in my media player. Anyways, it's a long, involving album, and it took a lot of listens before I could, like, parse it all out and, like, identify what was going on, because, yeah, it was just so much bigger than I was expecting. I mean, put up next to the Franz Ferdinand album, it was like night and day. And what I value in music has changed considerably over time, but when I was younger, I really wanted albums that I could sink my teeth into, that are long and involving, and you listen to it over and over again to get more and more out of it. With that Franz Ferdinand album, you understand it completely on, like, the first listen. You know, like, any of those songs, they're immediate. You get the point right away. It's a fun time, and if you listen to it 10 times, it's going to be the same experience all 10 times. You listen to something like Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3, and at first, you're not going to know where the songs begin and end. Like, especially when you go from track 2 into track 3, Cuts Marked in the March of Men, which is basically a sequel. It's like the next scene immediately after the previous one, where it's continuing this, like, battlefield story. And the whole album has this kind of flow to it that makes dramatic sense. And, yeah, it's a fucking behemoth to behold. Now, I don't think I was aware at the time of the overarching narrative of Coheed and Cambria albums, because I remember that when I finally got Good Apollo on Burning Star 4, at first I hadn't liked it as much. This was a pattern for me with Coheed albums. After In Keeping Secrets, each new one I bought, I didn't like at first and eventually got into, except after the fourth one where I didn't like them at first and then never got into them. But with Good Apollo, I remember there's lots of references to God in the lyrics on that album, and I remember like wondering if Coheed was like a Christian rock band and being worried that they were, because I was definitely not about that. And I think it was when I was researching that question that I found out that this was a concept album. That they're all concept albums, in fact. Coheed and Cambria albums all tell one continuous epic sci-fi narrative, which Claudio Sanchez has multiple times attempted to adapt into other mediums. Never completely, which has made it a very fucking confusing storyline. Because, like, basically there's all kinds of random tidbits of knowledge that people have about it. Like, just stuff that people either picked up on, or that Claudio had explained, or that comes up in the graphic novel attempts. Because first there was, like, an attempt to do their first album in comics, but it only ended up being like a couple of issues and it fell through. Then the third album was completely adapted into a graphic novel, but it was also really fucking confusing and weird. Then there was like a restart of trying to do the original comic, and then the fifth album had a novel tie-in, and like, it was just a lot of different shit. And I don't think that the comic, like, the one that eventually became like a serial, I don't think continued for very long. So, like, understanding the Coheed narrative is all piecemeal and weird, and it's so fucking out there. Like, it's an epic sci-fi story, but with all kinds of crazy meta elements and, like, really weird characters who would never be in a real movie. You know, like, for instance, Al the Killer, one of the characters on this album, who is what Claudio has described as a Han Solo type character, except that his thing is that he kills white girls. He's a racist serial killer who murders white girls, and he's the Han Solo character of this epic sci-fi narrative. Claudio has the most edgy sensibility in the world, which is a big part of what I love about him. And, you know, in the future I'll probably talk more about other Coheed albums, and I've talked about them extensively. If you've never heard my video, Coheed and Cambria, What Happened, I broke down all of their albums in exhaustive detail, but more trying to create a trend across them, whereas here I really want to focus on this one album. Because even before I knew it was a sci-fi narrative, like, I knew In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 was a song about a battlefield. Because when he screams, "Man your own jackhammer," like, I was imagining being on gigantic turrets that are firing at spaceships. And that is literally what it's intended to be. Like, it's just so clear to me. And, which makes it really exciting that they captured that so easily, you know, with such indirect language, just by the sound of the music. These epic chants going on, the oh, 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 whoa, which then gets reincorporated later in some ways in the song The Light in the Glass, and then on later albums. There's just so much. There's so much going on in a Coheed album. In Keeping Secrets is fucking epic. Cuts Marked in the March of Men continues that feeling, but gives us more of a structured song, like a more typical structured song, I should say, because In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 is one of a trend on this album of what still makes this one of my favorite Coheed albums, which is that it has tons of multiphasic songs. And I am a huge, huge fan of multiphasic songs. That is to say, songs that continue to evolve over the course of the track, often without ever going back to what they were before. While In Keeping Secrets does do that, it sort of veers off into another direction, and then the song kind of ends and restarts, but like a much more epic version of the chorus, which is awesome in its own right. It's a fucking fantastic song. But then we have songs like Three Evils Embodied in Love and Shadow, The Crowing, and The Light in the Glass, and these songs all kind of just go, and 2113, they all kind of evolve in new directions without ever going back to where they started. Like, Cuts Marked in the March of Men is like 2 minutes of this sort of jaunty, fun song about a guy getting tortured, which then breaks into like more of a emo, almost post-hardcore kind of sound, and then like continues to evolve in these increasingly emotional verses and sounds. And there's no chorus in this song. Like, each section kind of has its own chorus, but there's no like one unifying thing. There's nothing it comes back to. And by the end, it's kind of a different song than it was at the beginning, yet the transition feels really natural. And there's plenty of this on all of Coheed's albums, but I feel like it was focused on more strongly with this one, which is in itself, I think, the shortest Coheed album in terms of track list. Maybe not. Maybe it was their first one, but there's only 12 songs on this, and that's including the secret track, 2113. But the songs are quite long. Yeah, Three Evils is my favorite song on the album. I get really emotional listening to this song. I fucking love the lyrics. I love the refrain of "pull the trigger and the nightmare stops" that repeats at the end of the song. And just the imagery of, like, following you across the interstate, walking away, dear my friends and the time we've spent, forever after, beyond this, when will our nightmare ever end? It's just like, it's got a lot of raw, like, teenagey emotions. And I will say of this song that I think the production sucks. Like, when I say that about this album, okay, what my problem is with the production is that the guitar tones are very thin. Like, the guitar doesn't have much weight to it across the album, and sometimes it feels like it's just kind of in the background. And in this song, you really feel that when it gets into the "Dear My Friends" part, because when Claudio stops singing and the guitars are just going in the background, they sound way too quiet. It's like nothing's in the forefront. Like, Claudio's vocals would have been there, but as soon as he stops singing, there's nothing there. Nothing's in the front of the mix, and everything sounds like background. And this is a persistent problem across this album. The only times that it's kind of saved are when what they're playing is heavy. Like just, you know, it's not that the guitar tones are heavy, but just like the actual riff is heavy. You really hear this in parts of like The Crowing, like when we get into the, yeah, I fought the decisions that called and lost my mark as a revel in peace and this. Like, that part sounds heavy. when you get to Al the Killer, and it's got the big riff. That whole song, manages to come out okay because it's heavy and has lots of like extra noise in the background. That song just has like weird sounds in it because it's supposed to sound like really disturbing and fucked up. So they put all kinds of effects on it, and it sounds really good compared to most of the album. But in spite of all that, the songwriting on Three Evils and the emotions of that song still make it my favorite track on the album. And then you get to the Crowing, which is probably the most like dramatic song on the album. It's interesting. This album, all of it is fairly like emotional and weighty and dramatic, and like with the exception of songs like Al the Killer and A Favorite House Atlantic, there's sort of a fun section in the middle of the album. It's like it starts off as an epic war, and Keeping Secrets and Cuts Marked is just this battlefield, this crazy shit's happening everywhere, and it's telling a lot of stories at once. Like, there's a lot of named characters in this story, and we're hearing about all of them, the navigator, the pilot, her favorite, the one they call the vision that bears the gift. Like, these are all characters, and we're getting these glimpses into their stories. Then we sort of focus with Three Evils and The Crowing and even Blood Red Summer, and each of these songs is about like one character, and it's a very like personal, more emotional story. Three Evils is about someone being like tormented and wishing for the nightmare to stop. The Crowing is about someone who's sort of gets dropped away from heaven. This song is about a character called Ambelina in the story who is like an angel who had her wings torn off, essentially. That's the easiest way to explain it without like trying to describe the whole plot of Coheed and Cambria. But like it's a very like overwrought emotional song that totally works because of the fact that Claudio can do overwrought emotions so well. The ending part of this song, where it's got like 4 different vocal layers, each singing their own part, is one of my favorite things Coheed and Cambria ever wrote. I really love the sound of that part. And that's another big multiphasic song where I would actually say I don't care that much for the early phases of The Crowing, but I love what it builds into. And I love that it builds. That's, again, my favorite thing about a lot of the songs on this album is the big build-ups. Then you get to Blood Red Summer, and this song is, again, overwrought and emotional, except that it's kind of goofy and tongue-in-cheek. Like, it comes off as a fun little jaunty dance song, just that the lyrics are, what did I do to deserve this? It's a goofy track. I could easily see laughing at it, but also it totally works when you are feeling that way. When you are feeling like that, what did I do to deserve this? It's like it's making fun of itself for having such a dramatic emotion behind it, but at the same time, the emotions are real, if you get what I mean. But this kind of leads us into the fun section of the album, which is where we get onto the Volurium Camper, which is a spaceship that Al the Killer runs. Again, he's the Han Solo character, so we get into kind of a fun, wacky part of the album. Starting with the Volurium Camper 1, Faint of Hearts, which is just a straight up like farcical love sex song where a guy is singing to his gun. It's a love song about a gun, and it's very cheeky. It's very like, it's kind of grimy because like you can tell it's a sex song, but like wrong. Like the lyrics like, did somebody take your tongue away and worries of the words that you couldn't say if they could have saved them from. It's like creepy. It's like a love song from someone you don't want to be in love with you, And it's got cowbell in it, which is hilarious. You can even hear like laughter in the background of the song too, and the lyric "cuckoo ka-choo" going on. Yeah, it's a goofy ass song, but it's really fun. Unfortunately, it is then followed by what I consider to be one of the worst songs of early Coheed and Cambria's career, the Volurium Camper 2 Back End of Forever. I honestly hate this song, and for a long time, in fact, this would still be the case if I didn't just listen to it for this review, I just removed this song from the album on my computer. Like, I had deleted this track from my computer entirely, and so when I listen to it on MP3 players and stuff, I don't even have this track. I just think it's really weak and lame. Like, the main thrust of the song is this, like, plucked riff that I think sounds obnoxious. I hate Claudio's vocals in this song. He's just got this really try-hard, whispery voice. I don't think the chorus is catchy. I hate this song. Like, to me, this is the overwrought emotions of the crowing done wrong. Like, it's the same kind of tone as the crowing, but whereas that song, like, built to these big epic emotions and had this payoff, Back Into Forever just feels weak. It feels like a shittier version of the same thing, and I really don't like it at all. And it also kind of kills the fun section of the album. Like, you know, we go Blood Red Summer, which is kind of getting fun, Faint of Hearts, which is super fun, and then the next two tracks, Al the Killer and A Favorite House Atlantic, are super fun, so why is this track in there at all? It really feels like this song could have been left on the cutting room floor. The album is long enough as it is. I don't know. Maybe other people don't feel the same way. I've always hated this song, though. But then you get to the Delorium Camper 3, Al the Killer, and this one is really out there because it's like a metal song, essentially, that's really dark and grimy and edgy as shit. But much like Faint of Hearts, it's tongue-in-cheek and goofy because this is a song about a psycho murderer, but the chorus is like, die white girls, die white girls. Like, what the fuck? You know, it's, again, edgy bullshit, but of the most tongue-in-cheek variety, the most self-aware kind of edgy bullshit, and I really love the song. I think it's a lot of fun. It's got these, like, distorted vocals that are like, seal the lips of the voice with haste, and gathering out the sounds they make that way, which is creepier than I'm making it sound, but, yeah, I think it's a really fun track, and I like that this song and Faint of Hearts exist on this album because they are so fucking different that it really opens this thing up to feel like an adventure. Like, when you're listening to, if you cut those songs out and you just had, you know, In Keeping Secrets, Cuts Marked, Three Evils, The Crowing, and The Light in the Glass, and 2113, this would be like a prog album. And then you toss in Blood Red Summer and A Favorite House Atlantic, and they mix it up a little and make it have like some singles kind of songs, you know, some stuff that's not as progressive and is a little bit more light and fun. But like Faint of Hearts and Al the Killer just sound totally different. Like, Faint of Hearts is, again, like a groovy sex song, and Al the Killer's like a fucking, like, metal song. So, yeah, it really adds that spice, which I think is integral to Coheed and Cambria's appeal. Like, that they've always had this eclecticism to them. They've always had tracks on their albums that kind of break away and do something really different from what you're expecting. And none of their albums is just the same all the way through. So yeah, I think it's a great power of Claudio's songwriting. Then, of course, you get to A Favorite House Atlantic, the big fun fucking single, which is a very tight song. Like, it kind of has two amazing choruses in it. Like, there's already the, you know, good eye sniper, I'll shoot you, run with the words you scribbled on the walls, the loss of friends you didn't have. And so you've got that thing going, and that plays through a couple times, and that's fucking great. And then you get into the big, bye bye beautiful, don't bother to write. And you got that thing, and they're both equally great choruses that somehow can link into each other perfectly, you know. So this whole song is just like a constant linking of fun verses and choruses for like 3.5 minutes, and it's fucking tight and great. Which then leads us to The Light and the Glass, which is the big closer. It's 9.5 minutes long. It's epic. It is way overwrought. It is corny as fuck. And I loved it when I was younger. And I don't know how to express how I feel about this song now, because I feel very weird about it. Because this song starts off what I can only describe as gay as fuck. Like, it opens as like this uber soft ballad, like way too soft, like a lullaby soft, you know? And I actually really still love Claudio's vocal performance in this part and the lyrics, but the guitars are corny. Like they're too up high major chord sounding, you know, but his soft vocals where he's like, did I bother telling you this with the words that jump teeth and cross lips? Like, it's fun to sing along to, and it starts building into this ballad as he's singing, you left the light on, and we start getting that like boom, da, boom, you know, kind of ballad sound, like that 80s style. But then we get some chugging guitars in there, and it gets a little bit more like seedy and dark as he's ignoring the words of your obnoxious little brother. And then that starts building up. Then we get to where he screams like, I'll leave the light on a fire. And that part kind of makes me cringe because it's just so overblown, so in your face with going into these huge emo sounding, you know, emotional parts. And then like it keeps building from there, but then suddenly the song starts to get interesting where it's introducing more and more of a dark undercurrent. And then there's this weird like flighty part where he's just singing liar, 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 which is weird. Then it gets dark, and then all of a sudden it just explodes into an enormous guitar solo and like the most epic sounding part on the album. Like this, it suddenly is as epic as in Keeping Secrets again. Like it suddenly is another huge war scene almost, you know? And he's screaming, your father's daddy passed in his sleep. And it's like, oh my fuck, and like you're crying and shit. And then you get these two back and forth call and response vocals just going, pray for us all, pray for us all. And it's like kind of creepy, and there's this huge guitar solo going on, and it's like this song transformed completely from like the lightest, most cheery ballad in the world to the darkest, most hard-hitting emotional guitar solo. And it kind of all makes sense together, but like, I don't know. When I was younger, I loved this song because I loved the overwrought emotions. I loved the lyrics. I was in like I was like in love with someone who lived a whole country away, and like the lyrics about carving her name across your arm really appealed to me. But like, man, when I listen to this song now, it's pretty cringeworthy. I can't lie. Like, I really have a hard time with it, even though it ends in such an epic way. And that's pretty much it for the main thrust of the album. But then after like 99 silence tracks or whatever, you get to 2113. And 2113 is a very interesting track because it's 9.5 minutes long, almost 10 minutes long. This song is the longest track on the album, and it's a hidden track, and it sounds really different from the rest of the album. This song is suddenly a prog opus, like in the vein of like a Rush song or something. It's very much about changing and evolving, and not even in like cohesive ways all the time. Like, whereas most of the songs on this album that have an evolution, it feels very natural. 2113 almost feels like a bunch of random parts stitched together, and it's telling a story that's like from another perspective part of the first album. It's very weird, and I'm guessing that's why it's a secret track, is both because it doesn't exactly fit the narrative of this album, and also because it's like just such a fucking bizarre song that like it's maybe not the most accessible track. Like maybe they just didn't want to consider it a part of the album. I have no idea, but it's really good. Like, it's weird, and it goes through all these different phases, but it's got lots of interesting parts in it. And then it also fades out into, like, the last minute and a half of it is kind of a different song, this acoustic song called I, Robot. And yeah, it's a weird track, and I'm glad it's there. Like, it definitely adds something to the album, and it's really interesting to hear it sort of after the album's over. Like, it's it's an extra omake kind of thing, you know? It's like it's a bonus track, to say the least, but it's so long that it ends up being its own epilogue chapter, sort of. It's just interesting to me that the album still manages to feel complete without it, and yet it also is at home there, you know? Rounding out the album to probably close to 80 minutes. And yeah, that's In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3. It is a very ambitious album, like insanely ambitious for a band that was still not big yet when this album actually released. You know, this A Favorite House Atlantic and Blood Red Summer put Coheed and Cambria on the map, but they were not there beforehand. You know, they were a pretty small time band, and you can really hear that they were shooting above their weight level in terms of like what they could produce. Like, they were trying to make something that sounds incredibly big and full, and I would say that they only really got the production chops to do that on the next album. You know, when you hear Welcome Home and you hear the final cut, and these songs sound fucking enormous. Like, that's why Welcome Home works so well. That song is repetitive as shit, and like, it's mostly this one chugging riff, but that riff sounds crushing. It sounds like the fucking world coming down on you. And that's why, you know, the production of that album succeeds so much. And I would even say a track like Domino the Destitute from their album The Afterman Dissension, which I don't like Domino the Destitute as much as In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3, but it's a similar type of song, and you can really hear how the enhanced production helps it a lot. And it almost makes me wish like I had a remaster of In Keeping Secrets, which I don't remember. I feel like they did remaster this album or something. I'm not sure, because I know they remastered their previous one. If they have remastered it, I haven't heard it yet. In any case, yeah, it's still a really solid album, regardless of the flaws in production, because, you know, you can still hear the ambition even through it. And certainly for me as a 14-year-old who couldn't tell the difference, it was fucking magical. And yeah, Coheed and Cambria ended up being one of the bands that sort of shaped my taste. Through this and the Mars Volta and Tool, got into progressive rock music because those bands are highly influenced by, you know, classic prog. That sort of dragged me down the rabbit hole into more prog music, and more especially story-driven albums. I was really into concept albums at the time because, again, as a kid, I wanted to listen to something over and over again, pore over it, really like get into the bones of it, because I had nothing in the world but time to do that. So, you know, that's why I got so invested in albums like this. And Coheed and Cambria would go on to have more of my favorites. Like In Keeping Secrets, while it was the album that got me into them, in the long run, it would be their first album, The Second Stage Turbine Blade, that really became my favorite Coheed album. It was my favorite album outright for a long time. I really fucking love that album, and, you know, I like their third and fourth albums a lot as well. Anyways, I don't know if I'll cover any other Coheed on this, because, you know, I would like to cover more bands in the course of the old-ass album cast, but stick around, and next time, let me look at my fucking list here. You know what? Fuck it. I feel bad about the fact that I didn't start from the real beginning of my musical history, that I started with the Mars Volta and me getting into, like, other music, because I think I deserve to talk about Linkin Park and to share some stories about Linkin Park. So, you know what? I think I'm going to talk about both of the first two Linkin Park albums on the next episode, Hybrid Theory and Meteora. So look forward to that. I'll see you then.